First, I'd like to thank Tony for the invitation and for thoughtfully putting me at the very end of the day and when they were in the dark room. So I won't notice anybody nodding off, but you know, the desk I realized is a little resonant, so if your head hits the table, we'll know. Anyway, I changed the name of my presentation a little bit. I went from through the humanities to through their humanities. So I'm going to talk about just the general idea of training Americans to advanced levels, and I do Chinese, so everything will be in that framework. And the assumption here is if you're going to spend a lot of time learning a language, if you're not heading people into advanced levels, you're kind of wasting time. Their time, your time. Over the years, I've noticed a lot of students who learned a little Chinese and come back to see me 20 years later and they don't even have a little Chinese. So I always assume that the goal is to get them up there working in the language, and they usually stay there. So that's my start off, I guess. When we look, I look at this operation that we have people in a foreign language learning environment. We're having to train Americans, generally speaking, from zero all the way up. So, and since in our wisdom, our American society has decided to piss away the natural resource of young children learning languages, so we start something like Chinese as in the beginning of university many times. So we kind of make it difficult for ourselves. I always say that looking at this, we have two basic modes of instruction. One is just sort of like a yellow item-based instruction that we usually use for people coming into a language. And then a higher level is more like a strategy-based instruction. We're teaching people how to negotiate in the language and culture, how to learn in the language and culture. Overall, that's the pattern. This is the scale that we use. Our approach is we don't teach very much. We don't talk about proficiency very much in our programs. We look at these scales as that's a data point we can use to sort of let us know how we're doing year by year. But as I said before in other comments, in a lot of what we try to do, we don't rely on this kind of scoring or this kind of rating to help us understand about placing students in programs or in internships, things like that. I always, I went right by you, Ray. This is one of the graphics that I always start my students, my pedagogy students with. I want them to look at what goes into getting that rating, to getting those ratings. And if we're going to get marked those ratings, to understand that the higher you go, the more difficult it is to increase the rating, and that there's here in Ray's graphic, there's 2,900 hours of instruction required to get yourself through a superior level. I'm sure that's, to me, this is an indicator of things. We have, of course, the 1980s, what it takes to get to languages in the different language categories, but this is a generally good graphic for me to indicate what we're looking at and what we're, I always like to compare that to learning the first language. The reason is, I always have to tell people, we have to be more efficient in teaching the second language or teaching Chinese than we are at, say, learning or teaching a first language. And Hector Hammerly was the first guy that I know who actually said it takes a long time to learn a first language. Since that, I've heard anywhere from 18,000 hours to 35,000 hours to get to the ability of being able to use a language well enough to say that that person knows a language. That little lady there is the one who taught me a lot about how that works. It realizes that it's every day, every week, 12 hours of contextualized language exposure with a hell of a lot of positive reinforcement. Yeah. And that's sort of, you have to go through that. So we don't have that kind of resource for teaching our second languages. And on top of that is conversation. Recently I have learned, having spent some time in middle schools, that even when a native speaker gets to the ages of 12, 13, 14, doesn't necessarily mean they can carry on a conversation. So with our students, not only are we trying to get them the language, but conversation is the hallmark, right? The engagement in the language, in the other culture, is the ability to engage in conversation. We've heard that a lot. I think we always have to have a clear idea what conversation is, because it's a very major term, and maybe at some point we'll cover that. Looking at the language, there are two general views. One is, say, the LAD view from Noam Chomsky and the ALAS view from Brunner. We tend to be over in the Brunner class, a category of it takes a village to teach a kid a language. We just put Chomsky's comment up there because we think faith-based linguistics is sort of interesting to think about. But we're saying if you want to get to these roads of proficiency, and how can you do it? Now, we had an opportunity once where we were going through stacks and stacks of resumes for students wanting to go into internships in China, and we kind of categorized, and everyone who was ready to go into, say, a 2+ or a 3 level, every one of those students fell into one of these categories. One, you had to have the fortune of being born into a family that speaks the language. That's how you get all those hours of deliberate practice, as people say. Or you can spend extended periods of time functioning in the target language. You can if you have a language program, you can recruit expats, or you can recruit missionaries into your program, or other people who've done things abroad. Usually doing something abroad is more important than just being abroad. And then a study in an extended governmental or academic program. And that for us has always meant means continued study through the graduate level. One of the things we noticed is when we looked at students who had reached 2+ or 3 level, we were looking at people who were basically roughly in the graduate student age range. A lot of that has to do with just how much time it takes. A lot of it has to do, though, because when you're putting people into say a Chinese company, they have to have certain level of command of the culture, and that takes a certain command of a certain maturity in order to do that, and that's one of the reasons. In terms of things like getting into culture and humanities, just an aside, when we were working with our STEM schools in Ohio, we kind of quickly came to a conclusion that if we were going to try to put our high school students in touch with high school students in China, that we would stick with STEM subjects. Because if they're talking about natural sciences and that sort of thing, they have a pretty good opportunity of exchanging information or shared information. But when it got into cultural things, it fell apart very quickly. So we always think that the cultural thing actually requires a certain amount of maturity, and we realized that, I don't know how it is in your place, but in Ohio, high school students don't care about anybody but other high school students when it comes to values and things like that. They're saying, well, here's the guesstimates of all that time, what it takes to get to advanced proficiency. So we looked at DLI. So DLI, it takes at least 2 years it does maybe not contiguous years, but 2 years to get people up to a level where they're going to be testing at 3. So that's about $250K per year. And so it's about 500,000 roughly. By the way, these figures don't come from, I have to explain that I'm on the board of visitors at DLI and I am not using any figures they gave me. So there's a little difference there, but this isn't it. But they can send somebody through DLI for 2 years or 2 year-long programs. They won't necessarily get to a 3. The guesstimate for what it costs to get somebody through Foreign Service Institute was $750K to get to that level of 3. Again, these are guesstimates. Again, even though that kind of thing is not, even though they might cost something along that line of getting people to level 3, it's not assured that they will actually be at level 3. And then I'm working on some figures I have from NACP from 2005 to 2010. And we figured it comes out that the cost of a level 3 in that program was about $1.6 million per. We'll see how that works. The problem of what we have is extended programs. Extended programs cannot provide the necessary time. I mean, we do not have enough time in our institutions to give people the amount of time it takes to reach these high levels of proficiency that we're talking about. There are different reasons. Curricula are limited by academic traditions. A Chinese major in a U.S. university will only be in Chinese class a small fraction of time, say, that an English major in a Chinese university will be in an English class. Our traditions require that they get a broader education, they take a broader range of courses, and Chinese, even if you're a major, it's going to be a portion of what your curriculum is. What's important for this is what we call co-curriculum. That is out-of-class activities that's coordinated with the curriculum, so that has to be, you have to be able to handle that. Students who are, American students who are learning to get to that level in an extended language program, they have to use time outside of class to get to their goals. And for us, our assumption is we say the culture, namely the second culture, is the enabling framework. The way we can get our students to the amount of time that they need to get to the language, to the level of proficiency in their language, is that they have to be able to work within the culture of their language. So if you want to learn Chinese, you have to work within Chinese culture. We'll talk a little bit about that. My idea of culture in this case is pretty operational. I would say that I could describe my knowledge of English grammar as the ability to complete a sentence or participate in a given discourse without any premeditation. If I want to say something, I start it. I depend on what I roughly call my knowledge of grammar to get me to the end. I don't have to think about it. And the way we think about culture is roughly that way. It permits you to negotiate social interactions without premeditation, so that if you know the culture well, you get into a social environment, you can see your way through that environment. We should note that both grammar, a knowledge of grammar, and knowledge of culture, does not mean you don't have error, nor does it mean you can't do things that harm you. You can say things in perfectly good English that will cause you personal harm. And you can act in such a way in your own culture in a way that may not benefit you. I have got a lot of examples of that, but we'll just move right along. And I'm thinking about culture in the humanities. And again, I go back to the FSI, the maven of FSI, I guess, Hector Hammerly, and looking at culture in different ways. There's a behavior culture, the culture that lets you get through the day. Information culture, the ability to use language that is prized by the culture you're working with, or information, I'm sorry, that is prized by the culture you are working in. So if you're working in informational culture, you have to realize that there are a lot of things that the Chinese know about the world that Americans don't pay attention to, and vice versa. A good example is, if I go to China, I'm there almost every summer. The papers are full of everything that's happening in the college entrance examination system. And it's all over the place. Not anything about baseball. That information, yeah, go figure. Go figure. So if I'm interacting with people in the informational culture in China during the summer, I have to talk about the college entrance examination in order to let people know that I pay attention to what's going on. And then there's finally the achievement culture, which a lot of times is what people in university and humanities call culture. Achievement culture, the ability to refer to the hallmarks of your second culture civilization. And all of these have to do with, you're doing all this to achieve your intention in the culture. We train our students, we just tell them, the reason you're learning Chinese is you have some reason for doing it, try to recognize what your reason is, and then figure out how to achieve that intention. If we look at the overall idea of an extended program, say in Chinese, it looks something like this to us. And these are basically how we work it. There's a basic level of language. People come to us with 0, and we have to give it to them item by item by item. And after a certain point of time, we can focus them on reading and writing, or we can focus them on speaking and listening, or we can do it all at the same time. But a lot of times we take these different routes. But at some time they go through an integrated level where they're integrating their skills. And then the important point for us is, if they want to get to advanced levels, they have to combine their ability in the language with domain. And domain is just some academic discipline, some career area, something that that they want to be, that they're interested enough that they develop a level of expertise that they can develop the capacity to express that and develop that in Chinese, all right? Domains are extremely important for the way we're looking at this. For example, in our Chinese programs, our students come from all kinds of backgrounds. We've had music majors, we've had engineers, we've had biochemists, we've had economists, all kinds of things. We even had, I think we once had a Chinese major. But the point is that they have to learn how to function in their area that they're aiming at. So, for example, the biochemist, his focus was on the properties of green tea that help fight cancer. That was what he was working on, and that's what he did his work on, his research in, and developed it. The domain thing works really well on a university campus. We're at Ohio State. I was told that there are a lot of people at Ohio State University. John just said, we're huge. And the good thing about being huge is there are a lot of people, and we can find native Chinese-speaking experts in almost any field you can think about. I mean, we did find a biochemist who liked to or wanted to do research in tea, the properties of tea. So it's kind of good being in a place like that. But we do this through what I think you do here at BYU. We have a mentor system. We hire mentors in these areas to work one-on-one with the student to introduce them into the discourse of their discipline or in the discourse of their domain. The basic information like who's big in their domain in China, what are the main the publications that they have to know about, and that works pretty good. They do that, and once they get through that, they get ready to go to China, and we just say they have to work in China one way or the other. You've got to belong to an organization. They've got to fit into the organization, and the way we do it, of course, is we want one of our students into a Chinese organization so that they basically, if they're going to do anything socially, it has to be done in Chinese. This idea of working in the language is extremely important for the final result of being able to produce our result. Our result is our students complete a program, they write a thesis in Chinese, they defend it in Chinese. Usually they defend it intercontinentally with video conferencing. They have a Chinese panel in China, another panel in the US. Those defenses usually go for about an hour and a half. So it's a pretty good challenge. I mean, if they're running into language problems, it's going to show up during those defenses. The other thing is they take tests. They take a standardized test like an OPI. And they take the HSK and other things that indicate their accomplishment up to that point. So what we like to do is think in terms not of proficiency in getting our students together, but we'd like to go back to pre-World War, about World War II, I guess, where the United States Army manuals describe language proficiency or ability as you can either be an expert or you can be competent. And to be an expert, it meant you basically work with your counterpart in a way. So if you think of that way, it means you have to be culturally attuned to whomever your counterpart is. So we think of both of these things is that this description presupposes sort of our idea that you have to have a domain, you have to be able to talk about stuff, and you have to be able to adapt to the culture of your counterpart. We always feel that a domain, if you know one domain, we feel that if you change your direction in your interest, you can learn the other domain. Once you learn to function in Chinese in one domain, you have the procedure for how to learn to function in a second or third or fourth domains. And we just assume that if you want to know how good you are in Chinese, just how many domains can you function in? That's a little bit like Roger Schenck, and if you want to know how smart you are, how many stories can you tell? So we want to look at humanities and the intelligence. So when we talk about humanities, we build this into our program. We give our students courses in humanities in Chinese, but they are Chinese, it's Chinese humanities, right? Because our goal is our students go to China, they interact with Chinese people, and they leave the impression that they're intelligent. I tell our student our goal is to allow our students to appear to be intelligent in Chinese, that we really don't have a fundamental concern whether they are really intelligent, but if they can make a lot of Chinese think they're intelligent, we're very happy with that. But we also think the idea is that, sort of like following Richard Nesbitt, that intelligence can be manufactured. You can make people intelligent. One of the good things about, I don't know if anybody reads Richard Nesbitt, but he's got a book called Intelligence and How to Get It, or How to Gain It. And one of the things he pointed out, that if we went by our forefathers' IQ tests, we are like geniuses compared to our grandfathers. But we're not, because the tests keep changing and they want to keep it at 100 as a benchmark. So, but the idea of intelligence is pretty much manufactured one way or another, depending on what your cultural background is and how well you can adapt to that cultural background. So we see the humanities, the Chinese humanities in this case, as the pathway to intelligence for our students. And we think that, well, you are as intelligent as the people you're interacting with think you are in their culture. One of the things we find is a big kind of a problem in a lot of Americans going to China, and maybe an advantage for some of our students, is Americans going to China go there and demonstrate how intelligent they are in Chinese, but their intelligence is American intelligence. Mainly, generally falls into the line of kind of telling the Chinese how to clean up their act. And we always find that, believe it or not, there's, maybe not everybody, but almost every 1.4 billion Chinese don't like that. We kind of use the idea, and the way we do this is Roger Shank's idea of intelligence. The intelligence is the ability to tell or enact stories appropriate to the people with whom you're interacting. So one of the things we have to do is decide, what stories do you tell, what stories do you interact with? There are certain things that work really well with Chinese and wouldn't work so well, say, maybe in the US. For example, we give our students a course on the issues in Chinese language. The reason for that is every Chinese, 1.4 billion, is an expert in Chinese language. So that if our student starts interacting with people at all kinds of levels in all kinds of environments and starts being halfway interesting about the Chinese language, they make a really good impression. Strangely enough, I've tried this in American culture, and not too many Americans want to sit around and talk about language. But it doesn't work the same way all the way across. And then the good thing, what we do with the humanities, when we teach our students the literary text, the historical text, those sorts of things, we kind of focus on those stories that the native Chinese consider to be appropriate for non-natives to engage in. There, mostly there's some issues, but there's sometimes issues where a non-native, an American working in China, is well advised not to follow a certain topic, not to engage in a certain kind of discourse, unless they are with a group of people that they know very well and can anticipate their response very well. Just on the other hand, talking about politics in China or trying to straighten out Chinese foreign policy for them won't work too well, no matter how good you are in those fields. We look at the strategy base, the big higher level, what we're trying to focus on. We focus a lot on learning in the language. We find that a lot of students coming out of language programs don't have it in their mind that they can actually use this language to learn things. And so you have to really give them the strategies for doing that. Even no matter how good a student they are of the language, they are students of the language, right? So now we get there, so we tell them, as we get to the point, we say, up to now, the language has basically been adapted to you. Now our job is to adapt you to the language. And learning in the language is one of the ways we do it. Learning in the language means you study something, you get information, and you formulate it in such a way that a native Chinese audience can actually follow what you're doing and optimistically even like what you're doing and enjoy it. So we adapt the learner to the language and the culture, and as I say, we give them a lot of practice in appearing to be intelligent. Anyway. So we say what we want to do, and the way we think, what we want to think about, is to go beyond proficiency and go to this idea of expertise, which for us would be something like proficiency plus a domain knowledge. You want to say that being able to show expertise to someone is very effective. We spend a lot of time getting our students into Chinese organizations. Believe it or not, if you go up and you go to someplace like in Chengdu and you tell a Chinese businessman that we've got this American student who would like to come and do an internship or work with you guys, and that he knows some Chinese, that person is very unlikely to believe what you're saying. So we have to be able to demonstrate that they are. So one of the ways we do is we have a system that we allow our students to engage in a conversation or in a presentation in the area that might interest those people. And it's very effective. And that's the whole thing. The main idea is that you use your domain knowledge to present yourself in the C2 culture. And in many ways, all Chinese are culturally very confident and very secure. there are certain things that all Chinese know, and all these things come from Chinese literature, storytelling traditions, all kinds of basic traditions, and these are the stories that we want our students to engage in as they get ready to go and function in a Chinese organization. Now, one of the things that I was looking at, one of the things we know about students who get to advanced levels of Chinese is they all want to be there. And usually people really want to get to the highest level. You don't have to push them too much. You have to give them opportunities, and sometimes you have to challenge them, but you don't have to kind of recruit them and run them through basic training, as it were. So we were looking at Chinese language programs that we use and what we do, and my wife is Mari Noda. More people probably know her than know me, at least in this room anyway. Well, maybe not. But at any rate, she calls it the colonial approach. And I asked her, well, what do you mean by the colonial approach? And she says, well, the white guys get all the money, all right? That's the colonial approach. And what's the option to that, right? And that's the idea, is you get programs and we push people through the programs and up, and try to get them all the way through. But they want to go through this process anyway. They really want to be there. So what's the other option? One thing that I was thinking about is the parable of the string by Dwight Eisenhower used. I don't know if anybody is this well known. Dwight Eisenhower was talking about leadership, and he said he got a string that he put on the table, and he started pushing it, and he said you can't get it to do anything, but if you start pulling it, it'll go anywhere you want. So what would the pull be? That's what would the pull be to something like that? How do we create a pull system if people already want to be there? Well, we know that there are some elements in our society that will pay to push through the system. I was wondering if it would be more economic if they were paid to pull through the system, i.e., that the learners, if they achieve for example, if they achieve a given proficiency in a given language, at the time they get a degree, if they were awarded a fairly substantial prize, let's say $100,000, maybe that would encourage a lot of them to do that. Maybe is more than we could handle. I don't know. But also, if the programs and teachers who empower those elements would be given that much, that kind of funding, you'd have also places willing to invest in it. However it is, I can see there's going to be some opposition to this, but at any rate, the idea that if you put the funding or you put the reward or you put what you've got at the end where it happens, you might end up with better results. At least you know that every time you pay, say, $100,000 to a student who graduates with a MA or a BA in Russian at the level 3, you're going to get a level 3 person for your money. How do you know that? Well, a pull administrator would be a little bit different. They would be able to provide assessments, high-stakes testing appropriate to the cost of the training. One of the things, if the training costs so much, why do we rely on a $100 or $150 test to demonstrate how well we're doing? If you're paying a lot of money to train a jet pilot, you probably don't set them down on a video game and say, oh, show us what you can do. But it really needs it could develop appropriate assessments for high stakes. We also need to develop appropriate assessments for low stakes, assessments that can be accessed whenever they're wanted by the learners or by programs. Focus on expertise, assess expertise. Ask that language plus domain be there. And supply transparency and ubiquity. It should be something that if a person is assessed, that person can go back and see how that assessment was made. And ubiquity means no matter where they are, they can be accessed. That would be an idea. The other thing that the pool administrator might do was look at the demographics. Develop profiles of who achieved these levels. I mean, do we really know, do we really have profiles? I have my own idea and from our own little world, but who actually gets to high levels of the language? And where do they achieve these advanced levels? And how much does it cost to achieve these high levels? At least there should be some way of having sufficient information without trying to figure out from all kinds of back doors on how things cost. And then thirdly, where are certified advanced level people employed? Where do they go? I think we're looking at, we have about 80 graduates who have graduated at level 3 in Chinese. And that's a small number, but it's really difficult to follow them and find out where they are, especially if they go to Washington and start inhabiting cubicles, because then they can't tell you where they are. But it's really hard. I mean, there should be ways of, or organizations that could actually do that. All right, so, and we'll have a few discussions about why this will never happen, but at any rate, that's my